If the heavy oak door of her office opened right now, the dean would find us. My hand rests only 3 inches from her collarbone. I can feel the radiating heat of her skin. It is a terrifying warmth. To the university, Dr. Clara Montgomery is a tenured force of nature. She is a paragon of clinical brilliance. She never lets her composure slip. But right now, she is only a woman holding her breath. She is silently pleading with me to ruin her. The air is thick with the scent of dried lavender and aged paper. The bitter aroma of her cold black coffee hangs in the small space. Every heavy tick of the vintage brass clock on her bookshelf is a countdown. It is a reminder that we are running out of time. I am her student. She is my advisor. The mahogany desk between us has become a fault line. It is waiting to swallow us both. I can hear the distant chatter of undergraduates outside. They are laughing in the courtyard. Inside this narrow room, the world has shrunk. The space between our shallow breaths is too small. Her slender fingers tremble as she holds the white pages of my latest essay. I wrote 30 pages this week. The curriculum did not demand it. I wrote it because I knew she would have to read every word. I chose the most complex passages of literary theory. I wove intricate arguments to force this private meeting. I am buying her time with my ink. Every red mark she makes on my pages is a touch she cannot give me in public. Clara slowly removes her gold-rimmed glasses. Her forest green eyes lock onto mine. The professional mask she wears in the lecture hall is gone. Her voice is a quiet, smoky alto. It is a low sound that barely carries across the desk. She tells me my analysis of Victorian literature is dangerously brilliant, but she warns me that my syntax is volatile. She says I am pushing boundaries that are not meant to be crossed. I do not move. I lean closer. My voice drops to a low, gravelly rasp. Some boundaries only exist because we are afraid of the other side. Clara's breath catches. It is a sharp, sudden intake of air. Her gaze drops to my lips. It lingers there for 1 second. Then her eyes dabs back to mine. They are wide and raw. She reaches for her mug of tea. Her hand brushes against my sleeve. The rough wool of my charcoal sweater scratches her bare wrist. The silence between us stretches. It is heavy and suffocating. We are standing on the edge of a cliff. We both know the wind is about to push us over. The fall will destroy us, but neither of us wants to step back into safety. My obsession did not start in her office. It began on a cold Tuesday in October. I walked into the lecture hall late. The heavy oak door groaned as I pushed it open. Dr. Clara Montgomery was speaking. Her voice was like velvet. It filled the massive room with effortless command. I stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat in the back row. I watched her. She moved with absolute grace. Her rich chestnut hair was pinned up. A few loose strands framed her high cheekbones. She adjusted her thin, gold-rimmed glasses. Her large, forest green eyes scanned the room. When her gaze brushed over me, my pulse jumped. I was 23 years old. I had never cared about poetry. But in that moment, I became a devotee. I spent the next 3 weeks studying. I lived in the library. I read until my eyes burned. I memorized every text on her syllabus. I wore my thickest charcoal gray sweater to block out the cold winter draft. The library was always freezing. My fingers were perpetually numb, but my mind was on fire. I wrote essay after essay. I made sure every page was flawless. Yet I deliberately left small gaps in my logic. I left intellectual traps. I wanted her to find them. I wanted her to summon me. The stakes were high. I was a scholarship student. If I failed my courses, I would lose everything. My entire academic career was on the line. But the risk did not matter to me. The only thing that mattered was her attention. I wanted her to look at me. I wanted to hear her speak my name. When she finally sent the email, my hands shook. The simple message requested my presence. She wanted to discuss my writing. I walked to her office with cold sweat on my palms. The corridor was silent. The only sound was the squeak of my shoes on the linoleum. I knocked on her door. I heard her quiet sigh from inside. Then she told me to enter. I opened the door. The warmth of her office hit my face. She was sitting behind the mahogany desk. She looked up. Her eyes dilated slightly when she saw me. She knew. She knew this was not just about the essays. She knew we were playing a dangerous game. But she did not turn me away. She welcomed me into the trap. And I walked in willingly. I sat in the low leather chair and waited for her to speak. She picked up my paper. Her fingers smoothed the sheet. She did not say a word for 10 seconds. The silence was agonizing. The warmth in the room was suffocating. I could see the slight clench of her jaw. She was trying to remain professional, but she was failing. We both knew the truth. We were trapped in this office together. There was no escape for either of us now. My life was built on strict order. I am 34 years old. I am a tenured professor. I have sacrificed everything for my career. I spent years in dark archives. I wrote books that few would ever read. I guarded my reputation like armor. But my armor felt thin when Julian Vance walked in. He was 23 years old. He possessed an intensity that defied the academic setting. He wore a thick charcoal gray sweater. He looked like a storm wrapped in wool. When he sat in my office, his amber-brown eyes never blinked. He watched me with a focus that made my skin flush. I could feel the heat radiating from my own neck. I had to clear my throat to find my professional voice. I looked down at his midterm essay. The text was brilliant, but it was also a message. He was writing to me. Every metaphor was a touch. Every line of theory was a challenge. He was testing my limits. He wanted to see if I would break. I knew the danger of my position. If anyone discovered my feelings, my career would be over. The university would show no mercy. They would strip me of my title. They would drag my name through the mud. I had to maintain the barrier. I had to be Dr. Montgomery. I had to keep my hands steady. But when I was near him, my hands trembled. I stood by the window. I pressed my palm against the cold glass. The contrast between the cold pane and my hot skin was sharp. Outside, the winter wind howled. Inside, the quiet of the office was heavy. The only sound was the rhythmic scratching of my fountain pen. I was grading tapers, but my mind was on Julian. I could still hear the low, gravelly rasp of his voice. I could still feel the phantom touch of his fingers near my wrist. I was a mentor. He was my student. It was a simple relationship, but we had ruined the simplicity. I adjusted my glasses. My reflection in the window showed a woman who was losing control. My forest green eyes looked tired. There was a faint flutter in my throat. I was terrified, but I was also alive. For the first time in years, I was not just surviving. I was feeling. The realization was terrifying. I knew I had to push him away. I had to grade his work harshly. I had to keep the door open. I had to enforce the rules. But every rule felt like a lie. Every distance felt like a punishment. I was trapping myself in my own cage, and Julian held the key. He knew exactly how to turn it. He knew which words would make me falter. I was the teacher, but he was the one teaching me how to feel. I could not let him win. Yet I had no desire to fight him anymore. The struggle was already lost. We both knew it. The rain did not stop. It pelted the leaded glass windows of her office. The sound was a rhythmic, steady hum. It isolated us from the rest of the campus. It was nearly 6 in the evening. The department corridor was completely dark. The other professors had gone home hours ago. Inside her small office, the iron radiator clanked and groaned. It released a dry, nostalgic warmth. The only illumination came from the green banker's lamp on her desk. It cast long, dramatic shadows across the wooden floorboards. We were bent over a copy of Virginia Woolf. Our heads were only 6 inches apart. I could smell her perfume. It was a subtle blend of bergamot and warm vanilla. The closeness made my skin prickle with heat. Her forearm rested on a stack of textbook pages. Her fingers traced the lines of text. I read aloud. My voice was a low, steady murmur. I tracked the familiar words of the novel. I stopped on a passage about absolute quietness. I slowly turned my head to look at her. The distance between our faces was too small. I could see the tiny gold flecks in her green eyes. I saw her look down at my lips. Her pupil dilated. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I asked her if she found safety in this stillness. She closed her eyes. Her chest rose and fell in a rapid motion. She told me I must not call her Clara. Her voice was a mere whisper. I did not pull back. I leaned closer. I told her that the rain had washed the world away. I said we were the only 2 people who existed. I asked her to let me say her name. She gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. Her knuckles turned white. She was fighting herself. She told me our feelings would ruin us. She reminded me of my brilliant future. She said she would not be the thing that destroyed me. But her hand hovered over my forearm. It was agonizingly close to the wool of my sweater. She did not touch me, but the heat of her skin radiated across the small gap. The restraint was a physical force. It vibrated between us like a tight wire. I wanted to break the wire. I wanted to reach out and pull her to me. But the push and pull kept us frozen. We were trapped in our own silence. The rain continued to fall. The clock kept ticking. We were both waiting for the other to break. We were too afraid of the consequences, yet we were too weak to walk away. Every second felt like borrowed time. We were living on the edge of a promise. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest in this room. We were drowning in our own restraint, and neither of us wanted to be saved. We just wanted this moment to last forever. Winter arrived with a brutal, biting frost. The campus puddles turned to thick ice. The radiator in her office was temporarily dead. I sat in my chair, shivering slightly in my damp coat. My fingers were stiff and cold. Clara noticed my discomfort. Her eyes softened into something raw. It was a look of deep concern. She rose from her desk. She walked over to the cabinet. She filled her electric kettle with water. The sound of the boiling water filled the quiet room. She poured the steaming water into a white ceramic mug. She added a spoonful of honey. The metal spoon clinked softly against the ceramic. She walked back to me. She stood directly in front of my chair. She held the warm mug out to me. Her cream silk blouse rustled with her movement. I reached up to take the mug, but I did not grab the handle. Instead, I wrapped both of my hands over her fingers. I encased her cold hands in mine. The touch was electric. A sudden, blinding shock ran through my veins. Clara gasped softly. Her forest green eyes widened behind her gold-rimmed glasses. But she did not pull her hands away. Her fingers remained locked beneath mine. I stood up slowly. I used my height to stand over her. My posture was entirely pleading. I told her that her hands were cold too. She whispered a desperate warning. She spoke of the rules and the locking latch on the door. I told her I had heard the lock click when she shut it. I said she had locked it because she knew. She knew we could not keep standing on opposite sides of the line without breaking. We stood frozen in the narrow space. Our hands were fused together around the warm ceramic mug. The burning heat of the tea was nothing compared to the warmth of her body. My thumb slowly slid off the ceramic. It brushed against the soft skin of her wrist. I could feel her rapid pulse fluttering beneath my skin. Her chest was heaving with shallow breaths. Her head tilted up. Her eyes were locked onto my mouth. It was a silent, agonizing surrender. I wanted to kiss her. The urge was a physical ache in my chest. But the push and pull remained. I pulled back slightly, my hand slipping from her skin. The cold air rushed into the gap. Clara let out a shaky breath and took a step back. The professional distance was reestablished, but the memory of the touch remained. We had crossed the line. We could never pretend otherwise. The mug sat on her desk. It was a silent witness to our weakness. The tea slowly went cold, but the heat in my veins did not fade. I knew I would do it again. I would touch her. I would break every rule to feel her skin against mine. The blizzard struck in the middle of December. It knocked out the power grid. It plunged the campus into absolute darkness. We were in the middle of a late-night thesis session. The lights died instantly. The radiator went cold. The bitter winter chill crept into the small office. The only light came from my emergency lantern on the floor. It cast a soft, orange glow across our faces. To stay warm, we sat on the floorboards, our backs pressed against the wooden filing cabinets. We shared my heavy charcoal wool coat. We draped it over both our shoulders. Our bodies were pressed tightly together from shoulder to hip. The howling of the wind outside was deafening, but inside, the silence was absolute. I could hear the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing. I could feel the heat radiating from her side. My arm was wrapped securely around her waist. I pulled her closer to share my warmth. Clara did not protest. She let out a soft, trembling sigh. Her head dropped onto my shoulder. She closed her eyes. The barrier of professor and student was gone. The darkness had stripped away our titles. We were only two cold bodies trying to find warmth. Clara whispered that we were playing with fire. I turned my head. My lips brushed against her chestnut hair. I smelled the bergamot on her skin. I told her that the roads were closed. I said the world had paused. I told her we did not have to be strong tonight. Clara looked up at me. In the amber glow, her green eyes were wide and vulnerable. Her hand rose. Her fingers gently traced my jawline. Her touch was warm against my rough stubble. I closed my eyes at the sensation. My heart was beating so loud I was sure she could hear it. I caught her hand. I pressed a soft kiss into her palm. Her skin was incredibly soft. She let out a shaky gasp. Her fingers curled around my hand. We were closer than we had ever been. The tension was an agonizing weight in the small space. I leaned down. My lips paused just a millimeter from hers. I waited for her to push me away, but she did not move. She only held her breath. The silence stretched between us. It was a promise and a threat. We were on the precipice of something irreversible. But before our lips could meet, a loud clank echoed from the hallway. The spell was broken. We both pulled back into the cold shadow. We sat in the dark. The distance between us felt wider than before. The cold air rushed in to fill the empty space, but the warmth of her hand remained on my cheek. I knew the barrier was cracked, and it was only a matter of time before it fell. The pale light of dawn broke through the frosted glass. The power had still not returned. The morning was quiet. The only sound was the faint chirping of birds outside. The reality of our situation crashed back with brutal force. Clara woke with a sudden start. She pulled away from my side as if she had been burned. Her green eyes were wide with a sudden, suffocating panic. She stood up quickly. Her fingers frantically smoothed her wrinkled silk blouse. She tried to pin her chestnut hair back into professional order. She did not look at me. Her face was pale. She told me I had to leave immediately. She said the facility crews would clear the path soon. She warned me that the department secretary would arrive in 30 minutes. I stood up slowly. My body was stiff from the cold floor. I reached out. My hand hovered near her arm. I wanted to touch her. I wanted to reassure her. But she flinched. She stepped back behind the mahogany desk. She used the wooden barrier to reestablish the professional distance. She told me that what had happened in the dark was a mistake. She called it a moment of weakness brought on by the cold. She said we had to forget it ever happened. My chest tightened with a sharp physical pain. I asked her how she expected me to forget. I asked how I could forget the feeling of her hand on my jaw. I asked how to forget her breath against my lips. Her jaw clenched. She refused to meet my gaze. She stared at the papers on her desk. I could see the pulse jumping in her throat. She was trembling, but she remained rigid. I stepped closer. The distance between us was only 2 inches. I could feel the heat radiating from her. I looked down at her lips. Her eyes darted to my mouth. The physical pull was stronger than ever. We were almost touching. But her hands were clenched at her sides. She whispered that she was begging me to go. Her voice was thin and broken. The push and pull was agonizing. I took a step back. I picked up my leather satchel from the floor. I walked out of her office into the freezing morning air. The cold wind bit my face, but the fire in my chest was still burning. I knew we had reached a peak. The tension was too high to maintain. We were both walking on a thin wire. One wrong step would send us plunging into the abyss. But I knew I would walk that wire again. I would do anything to be that close to her once more, no matter the final terrible cost. By the final weeks of the semester, the silence was unbearable. Clara had canceled our private meetings. She communicated only through brief, clinical emails. Rumors had started in the hallways. I heard the whispers of other students. They spoke of Dr. Montgomery and her favorite student. One afternoon, I could not take the distance. I pushed open her office door without knocking. I slammed it shut behind me. Clara looked up. Her eyes flashed with anger and terror. She demanded to know what I was doing. I walked directly to her desk. I asked her if she was going to pretend the last 9 months meant nothing. She stood up. Her voice shook with suppressed emotion. She told me she was trying to save my life. She said the department chair had asked questions. She warned me that if anyone found proof, she would lose her tenure. She said I would lose my graduate funding. I told her I did not care about the funding or the degree. I told her the only thing I cared about was her. Clara let out a bitter, raw laugh. Tears finally spilled over her lashes. They fell onto the open book before her. She cried that she cared. She told me she had worked her entire life for her reputation. She said she had sacrificed everything to be taken seriously. She yelled that she would not let a temporary passion destroy her life. The word temporary cut through me like a physical blade. I stepped closer. I reached out and grabbed her shoulders. My grip was tight but gentle. I could feel the heat of her anger radiating through her silk blouse. I looked down at her face. Her lower lip was trembling. I asked her if she truly believed this was temporary. Clara looked at me. Her chest was heaving with heavy breaths. She was pale and devastated. She could not answer my question. Her silence was the most painful sound I had ever heard. Then her hands came up to my chest. She pushed me away, but her touch lingered on my wool sweater for 3 seconds. She retreated to the window. She turned her back to me. The emotional dam had broken. The truth was out. We were both bleeding from the wounds we had inflicted. She whispered that she had accepted a research fellowship. She was leaving at the end of the term. She was moving across the country. The news was a final, devastating blow. I stood frozen in the center of the room. I realized our time was officially over. The clock on her shelf kept ticking, but it was no longer a countdown to our discovery. It was a countdown to her departure. I had lost her before I ever had the chance to hold her. The end was here. We were powerless to stop it. Melancholy hung over the room. It was the final week of the semester. I walked down the familiar corridor. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor. I carried my heavy leather satchel. When I reached her office, the door was cracked open. The room inside looked entirely different. Several cardboard boxes sat on the floor. They were half-packed with the books that had once lined her shelves. The vintage brass desk clock was wrapped in bubble wrap. Its rhythmic ticking was finally silenced. The silence was heavy. Clara was standing by the window. Her back was to me. She was looking out at the blooming cherry blossoms. The soft, pink petals drifted across the green quad. She had accepted the research fellowship. Her departure was a sudden, clean break. Everyone in the department assumed it was a prestigious step up. But I knew the truth. It was a desperate escape from us. I stepped into the room. The wooden floorboards creaked under my weight. Clara turned slowly. Her green eyes were hollow and tired, but they softened the moment she saw me. We did not speak for a long time. We simply stood in the half-empty room. We were surrounded by the physical remnants of our secret world. I looked at the packed boxes. I asked her if this was how it ended. I asked if she was packing her life to get away from me. Clara shook her head slowly. A sad, beautiful smile touched her lips. She told me she was not running away from me. She was running because she knew something else. She said she knew that if she stayed, she would never have the strength to let me go. She walked over to me. Her steps were slow. She reached out. Her warm hand rested on my forearm. The heat of her touch penetrated the wool of my sweater. She told me I deserved a life that was not lived in the shadows. She said I deserved a love that did not require a locked door. Her voice broke on the final word. A single tear rolled down her cheek. I saw the absolute devastation in her eyes. But I also saw something else. I saw the sweet relief of truth. We were no longer fighting the current. We had stopped pretending. I covered her hand with mine. I squeezed her fingers gently. The breeze from the open window blew through the room. It smelled of spring and fresh grass. We were standing in the ruins of our structure, but for the first time, the air felt clear. The heavy weight of our secrets had lifted. We had admitted the truth. We loved each other. Even if she was leaving, we had this final, quiet realization. It was a painful, beautiful gift. We were no longer bound by the rules of this university. We were only bound by the truth of what we felt. And that was enough to carry us through the dark. The final day of the semester was bright and warm. The campus was filled with graduation laughter. Students in black gowns walked with their families. But I walked past them all. I walked up the stairs of the humanities building one last time. I pushed open the door to her office. The room was completely empty now. The boxes were gone. The shelves were bare. The green banker's lamp was gone. Only the mahogany desk remained. The warm spring sunlight streamed through the open window. Clara stood in the center of the empty space. She wore a simple, soft, white linen dress. Her chestnut hair was down. It flowed freely over her shoulders in the gentle breeze. She turned to face me. For the first time in 9 months, there was no fear in her eyes. The professional mask was completely gone. She smiled, a real, radiant smile. She told me my final grades had been submitted. She said the transcripts were locked. She told me I was officially no longer her student. I set my leather satchel on the dusty floor. I walked toward her. My steps were slow and deliberate. The hesitation and guilt of the past were gone. I stopped inches from her. I looked down into her green eyes. I told her I was finally free of this place, but I said I would never be free of her. Clara did not back away. She reached out. Her hands rose to my chest. I felt the steady, powerful beat of my heart beneath her palms. She whispered that she did not want me to be free. I reached out. My fingers gently tangled in her soft hair. I tilted her head back. I whispered her name. This time, there were no rules. There were no boundaries to hold us back. I bent down. I pressed my lips to hers in a deep, long-awaited kiss. It tasted of spring and relief. It tasted of a love that had survived the dark. The warm wind blew through the open window. It rustled a few forgotten papers on the desk. They scattered across the bare floorboards. But we did not care. We had finally stepped out of the borrowed time. We had entered our own. We had broken the structure to find each other. The sacrifice had been great, but the reward was this perfect, quiet peace. We stood in the empty room, wrapped in each other's arms, ready to face whatever came next. We were finally free. Thank you for listening to our story. If you felt the slow burn tension, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with your favorite moment. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, remember that some boundaries are meant to be broken. Let the rain wash the world away. Find your own stillness in the storm. We will see you very soon in our next beautiful and intense slow burn tale. Keep listening to our quiet hearts and stay safe. Goodbye.